Hello, Stepan here. Let's see what happens in this one. So I'm leading this person 1-0. I don't remember the game we played, to be perfectly honest. How come the rating is still provisional? Maybe... I mean, I definitely didn't play them in the last 3 days, I think. We will see. Okay, if bishop g2, I can go bishop f5 and go into that line I like, which goes bishop f5, cd, cd, queen b3, and bishop d7. We will see if white wants to do that. Queen b3 immediately is slightly less precise, because now I can go queen b6. It was better to take, and then go queen b3. Okay, now e6 saves my pawn structure. If... okay, bishop d6. I'm gonna take, because I have knight a6. I don't know what the problem is with this. I'm controlling b4 and c5, and the bishop isn't on this diagonal to take the knight off. So I feel like this is okay. The b3 pawn has been blockaded. Okay. So he wants to take on c6 and then take my knight, or he wants to take my bishop. Knight b4 seems okay. So knight b4, if knight f5, I play knight c2 check. Yeah, knight b4 seems okay. What if bishop d2? Knight b4, bishop d2. I can just play bishop g6. Okay. The idea was to take on c6 and weaken my a6 knight. But now the knight on d4 blocks the bishop on e3, so there's no rook a7. And c2 has to be defended. So in any case, I will have time for bishop g6, I feel. When they go queen b3 and you go queen b6 and you're allowed to take and go knight a6, usually white just has doubled pawns on the b file. So this is common strategically. Knight d4 is a nice idea. Unfortunately for my opponent, I believe knight b4 is good enough to defend against it. But we will see. Maybe knight f5 is okay. Maybe giving up the exchange for the bishop pair is fine. Although I don't think so. And now what I want to do is at some point, excuse me, go a5 to make sure that the b pawn never advances, and I want to increase control over the b4 square. Probably white just castles here. Probably. So castles, bishop g6, maybe knight d2 or knight c3. Probably knight c3. And then maybe bishop e7. And it's a normal game. He started thinking after knight b4, which is strange. I think that's the only defense, and it's a very thematic defense. I don't know what he's thinking about. Maybe rook a7. Oh, maybe rook a7 works. Oh no, it doesn't work. Rook a7, knight f5, knight c2 check, king d2, knight e3. And then knight e3, I'm an exchange up. No, rook a7 doesn't work. Rook a7, knight f5, knight c2, king d2, knight e3, knight e3. Seems fine to me. Let's go over it once again. Rook a7, knight f5, knight c2, king d2, knight e3. Knight e3 is forced, otherwise I take the knight on f5. So I'm left with rook on a7, a knight on f6, a bishop on f8, and the rook on h8, and he's got two knights, two bishops, and the rook, two knights and the rook, a bishop and the rook. So seems like a safe exchange up. We will see. I'm guessing castles is best. Knight a3 seems slightly strange because the knight would have to go to c2 from there. Okay, rook a4 I'm not too convinced with, because the knight's defended. So now I can just go bishop g6, I feel. Maybe even bishop g4. Maybe bishop d3. No, not bishop d3, but bishop g4. With the idea of going e5 and taking the e2 pawn. Seems interesting. So bishop g4, he can probably just chase me away. So I'm gonna go to g6, which looks at the knight, preventing the d pawn from moving away. Now, what I want to do is go e5 anyway, if he doesn't castle, and then I want to go knight c2 check, pick up the bishop on e3. And if knight f3 or knight c2, well, knight c2 I take, but knight f3 I go a5, defending my a pawn. Not much has changed since the previous position. Rook a7 still doesn't work. In fact, it's even worse now because there's no bishop on f5. The only question is, should I have gone bishop g4 or bishop g6? I doubt bishop d3 worked, although I do seem to pick up a lot of pawns. So bishop d3, e d3, knight d3 check. Let's say king d2. I don't have knight b2 because of rook a2. So I cannot take the b2 pawn. No, so it didn't work. If he plays bishop d2, I think I can go c5. I can also go a5. Unless I'm able to play bishop d3 in that position. So bishop d2, bishop d3. If bishop b4, then bishop b4, rook b4, bishop b1, rook b7. Seems kind of loose. I don't want to give up my b7 pawn. And if bishop d3, bishop d2, bishop d3, e d3, knight d3, the king now has to go to e2 or to f1, because if king d1, then knight b2 picks up the rook on a4. So let's assume king e2. Then my knight is still trapped, so that's no good. No, no, no. No good. If bishop d2, I go a5. I don't go bishop e3. He's playing really slowly. Really slowly. Yeah, and he did play bishop d2. Now, I would think that a5 is fine. What does he do against a5? I don't see anything concrete, so I'm gonna go a5. On bishop takes, I of course take with the bishop, not blundering my rook. I still haven't given away the b5 square, so I'm free to play e5. The knight doesn't have b5. So the knight most likely ends up on c2, either by force after e5 or now voluntarily. At which point I again have to examine bishop takes d3. If knight c2 voluntarily, I think c5 is okay. Although I'm giving away the b5 square. I mean, knight c2 cannot be played yet because the square isn't protected, but I'm just saying. If, let's say, knight a3 followed by knight c2. I kind of like the idea of going e5 and b5 to get rid of that pressure. Because the pawn on d3 is still pinned. So if I go b5, I'm threatening to take twice. And he cannot recapture. Preventing e5, I like that. I'm looking at bishop c5 with the idea of takes and knight c2, or takes and c5. Although I could also consider knight d7. Knight d7 with knight b6 to follow seems interesting, but I don't want to be moving the same piece multiple times. And f5 is kind of annoying. I like knight d7. I'm defending d5 for the moment, at least it's a pawn trade. e4 cannot be played. On f5 I can take. And if castles, I have Knight c5, finally getting rid of that rook. Or even bishop c5. Bishop c3 is interesting. Kind of like bishop c5, just to prevent castling. So I'm gonna do that. I also need to develop the rest of my pieces. I know that g7 is weak, but I would also like to castle kingside, and I don't see any immediate problems. Again, I have to bear in mind that I may have the option to go bishop takes d3. That's always a possibility. And also the knight is still on b1, so b5 looks interesting. So for example, bishop takes c5, b5. Takes, 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 the rook moves, I castle. Yeah, I don't want to give away my dark squared bishop. Definitely not. And he cannot really castle now, because I'd go knight c2. And that seems like game over. So he probably plays knight a3, followed by knight c2. Do I have anything good against that? Knight a3 seems annoying. And I cannot easily go c5, d4 because b7 is hanging. Okay. I did not expect king d2. I guess I'm gonna castle kingside to connect my rooks finally. I want to go rook e8, f6, e5. and break that center down. Okay, he wants to go knight a3 without blocking in the rook and without allowing knight b6. So I'm just gonna go rook e8 to make sure I can go f6, give my bishop a square, and go e5. I also want to play quickly because he's playing extremely slowly. I would love for him to get into time trouble. All the material is still on the board. The position is extremely complicated, and just 3 minutes on the clock definitely isn't enough. Okay, wants to go knight e5. Let's not allow that. f6 quickly. If d4, my bishop opens up. Okay, I cannot go e5 now because my knight's hanging. And if I go rook e7, maybe, if I go rook e7, maybe d4 is better. Because on bishop d6, there's c5. But then I have bishop c7. And then also, what's the point of going rook e7? I have to keep defending my a-pawn. Still, that seems to be the most sensible move. No, on c5 my rook is hanging. If I go rook e7, d4, bishop d6, c5, bishop c7, he takes. I cannot do that. So I'm gonna have to go bishop f8, but then again my rook is hanging. I need to be careful about that pin. Do I really want to go knight f8? Knight f8 seems bad. But I mustn't disconnect my rooks. That cannot happen. But if I'm gonna get the knight to e4 to prevent d4, I need to move my bishop. Okay, bishop f8 seems fine. I'm gonna do this so that my rooks are still connected, and so that my knight has the c5 square. I really didn't want to go knight f8, nor did I want to go knight b6. That just seems bad. Now if takes, I of course have to take with the c-pawn or with the knight, but taking with the c-pawn is fine. d4 does not win a tempo anymore. And knight c5 is annoying because d4 has been prevented, and I'm on the b3 pawn. So for example, if knight c5, bishop b4, I can go knight b3 check and pick up the rook in the corner. Perhaps I also could have gone bishop f7. But I like the idea of knight c5, knight e4, or knight b3. However, if d4 now, then my bishop is wide open. I may have to go b6 against d4 to prevent c5, but only maybe. Although probably, because c5 would be positionally unsound, because white would have bishop b4, a b4, and rook a4 at some point. Although against d4 I do have knight c2. But then rook a5. What? It's a very strange move. Very strange move. What happens on knight c5? Knight c5 is rook a3 forced. I'm going knight c5. Okay. Now, do the sacrifices work? Yes, they do, because I have knight f2 winning the bishop in the corner. So bishop d3, ed3, knight d3 check. King b1 is forced, and then knight f2 wins the bishop, or the exchange. That should be plenty of material. However, do I take with the bishop or with the knight? So bishop d3, ed3. Oh no, I take with the knight, because the king has no squares. Yeah, I take with the knight. So I go knight d3 check, ed3, knight d3 check, king d1, knight f2 check. Yeah. That works. The king doesn't have any of these squares. I have knight f2 in the end. This whole diagonal is taken by the bishop, and d1 leads to a fork. Of course I take with the knight, not with the bishop, because I need to keep covering these squares. Now you can see why my knight was useful on b4. It was there from the beginning of the game. I feel like I should take the bishop. Taking the knight is also tempting. Taking the rook, sorry. Yeah, let's just take the bishop. b2 pawns up. I don't see a way for white to take that knight, since I have bishop f5, and g4 leads to knight f4. Okay, wants to go king g2, so should I save my a pawn? He didn't take my a pawn. So if b6, king g2, bishop f5, knight d4, bishop g4, are my pieces safe? I feel like my pieces are pretty safe. So you know what, I'm gonna save my pawn. I'm gonna save my pawn because I don't see a way for him to win this knight. Worst case, I can just take the pawn on f4. I did not see that. But I can still go bishop h5, bishop g4. Wants to go knight e3. So my options are to go f5 against knight e3 or to play bishop c5 now, which seems better. So I'm gonna go bishop c5, just preventing that. Also now I have knight f2. There's no b4 because the rook's hanging. Two bishops and two extra pawns. This seems over. Okay, wants to force through knight e3. Probably wants to play bishop e3 first. I feel like knight f2 is correct because rook g1 is forced, so I'm gonna do that. And then I'm gonna go knight e4, pick up this bishop and trade the rook. That seems fine to me. Okay, so let's save the bishop. Let's go bishop h5. I don't think there's any reason to go to the other side of the pawns. I'm the exchange and 2 pawns up once he picks up my knight. That's way too much. Way too much. Yeah, I mean, this is it. It doesn't matter if he flags or not. Let's just make a queen. Two connected passed pawns in the center, no stopping that. Even if I didn't have one rook, I'd still want to be black. Do I want to prevent the knight from coming to f5? Do we play this positionally? Yes, we do. No concessions. No knight f5 for you. Okay, let's go a4 and weaken the c4 pawn. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe get the king closer. So a4, ba4, bishop c4. If rook c1, then rook a4 seems fine. So let's go a4. If I take this pawn, then I'm going to have a million passed pawns. Now it's much simpler to queen. Here. Okay. Yeah, it was really no fight after knight d3. So let's just see where he went wrong. So okay, this is all still normal. And now, as I said, cd5. This is the critical line. cd5, cd5, queen b3, bishop d7. What? No, sorry, knight c6, queen b7, bishop d7. Sorry, bishop d7. And now he has to go queen b3 because I'm threatening rook b8. So queen b3, now I go e5. He either castles or goes d3. I think castles is more precise because on d3 there's rook b8, queen d1, and bishop b4 check. Where this is the only move that doesn't lose. So if, for example, knight c3 or knight d2, knight bd2 or bishop d2, then the same pattern wins. You can just advance the pawn all the way, and yeah, that's the critical line. So queen b3 is, in my opinion, slightly imprecise, but okay, because even though the engine says plus 0.6, this seems equal. ab3 and now knight a6 seems okay. People usually play a6. Why? Stefan Pogosyan plays knight a6, but that's not precise. The engine says a6 is better, knight bd7 is better, bishop b4 is better. Why not knight a6? Let's see. So he should go knight c3. That does make sense. Now knight b4 is equal. I knew that. Okay, bishop g6, a5. Okay, all fine. Knight d7. Bishop e7 was better, or bishop c5. Okay, bishop c5. Now king d2 best move. Wow, nice. I didn't even consider king d2. Castles. Rook a1 best move. That's astonishing. Okay, I don't think I'd be good enough to find king d2 and rook a1 in this position. Rook a1 is a really nice move, but I don't think I'd be able to find it. Rook f8. And then knight f3 is a mistake. He should go cd5 or knight a3. I believed that he was gonna go knight a3 after rook a1. I thought that was the point. So I was slightly confused with knight f3, but okay. Wait, bishop e3 check? Then knight c2, okay, but the king goes, where does the king go? To d1, and then f6. Okay, yeah, that way I'm preventing the pawns from moving. That makes sense. I played f6, which is still fine. Bishop h3 is good, and still bishop e3, same pattern. I played bishop f8, knight c5, yeah, now he cannot defend. Now knight d3, boom! I'm really happy I found this. Normally I miss stuff like this. Yeah, now there's... Let's see, was there any point in taking on h1? I mean, I know that taking a full piece is better, but this also seemed very much winning. And it is. Okay, and I don't understand why he didn't take on a5. He should have taken on a5. Now I just defended the pawn. Although I shouldn't have. I should have gone bishop c5. Why? Why wouldn't I just defend my pawn? The engine is crazy. b6 is a mistake. Come on. Okay, because on king g2, why not bishop f5? Knight d4, bishop g4. What's the problem? Ah, c6 hangs. Ah, that's why b6 is bad, because c6 hangs. I didn't see that. Knight h4. Bishop h5, bishop g4, knight f3. Yeah, no, bishop c5, just controlling that. knight f2, bishop e3 takes, and this is pretty much over. I don't think. Let's see if g6 was good. No, the engine says just push e3, but why would I allow the knight into f5? Why? No need for that. Yeah, okay, this is over. Okay, thank you to my opponent. I think he missed knight d3. I was looking at bishop e3 or knight d3 sacrifices throughout the game. I think that helped me find it. It was a nice thematic game, I'm gonna say that. This knight on b4, let me scroll back to that. Where are we? This knight on b4 is an extremely powerful piece. And whenever you play the London system with either color, having a knight on b4 is just a huge advantage, especially if there's no a pawn. The engine says equal, but this is a strategic plus, especially when you do this, like I did this game. A knight on b4 is extremely powerful. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.